Lael was trembling against one of the cage walls in order to prevent himself from sitting and getting even colder. Nail was beside him, trying to keep him warm. Lael had to do the best he could to not lose his nerves nor mind. They weren't there for too long, but it felt like days. Lael never thought Nail not being able to speak was an issue until the moment he realized he could only hear his own voice. After a couple more minutes, they started to hear footsteps. They kept quiet, unsure of who was coming. Both looked up with hope they could see anything.
Nail! Lael!
We're down here!
Oh, I see a hole in the floor. Is that where you are?
Yeah, it's the only place it could be.
They could manage to open the cage with the keys they retrieved, making both men retreat with the light hitting their eyes. Lael was pulled off first, since he was thinner. He tried to adjust his vision to the lightness outside. Aiken noticed there were just two of them.
Where are the rest?
He asked, helping Nail to get out of there as well.
They'll be here shortly, I believe.
You believe?
Yeah. The tracker thing was giving mixed signals, so we split. We wanted to be sure to cover all of them.
Sandra was talking to Nail, assuring he was fine.
Strange. I'm sure there isn't any other device that specific tracker would recognize except Nail's earring. At least that's how Simon explained it.
Really? You may be right. I mean, I never looked at the device, actually. It was handed over to Sandra. I trusted what she said. I mean, Edath did say something about the signal, but Sandra said that it was bugged, so...
Lael opened his eyes wide, assimilating that information. He glanced at Sandra, who was going to give what it looked like water to Nail. In a glimpse of a second, Lael kicked that bottle before Nail could drink it. Both of them looked confused to Lael.
What did you do that for? Did you go mad or something?
Lael stared at her, and then to the water.
What exactly was in there?
Water's precious, so you shouldn't dispose of it like that.
Lael grabbed her by her t-shirt collar.
I think that you're just a good liar.
She looked at him with a shocked face. Alethea suddenly collapsed. Lael and Nail looked at her. Her eyes were wide open and her hands on her throat. Sandra laughed. Lael looked at her.
What the fuck did you do to her?
Nail ran towards Alethea and tried to take her hands off her throat and hold her still.
I did nothing wrong. Why are you accusing me all of a sudden?
Yeah, right. You've got about 5 fucking seconds until I decide to kick you inside that cage or kill you! So you better damn well spill it!
I knew this was my end anyway, but I actually hoped I had gone further. Well, anyway, nothing I can do now. What was in that bottle was indeed water, but with a little magic dust.
Drugs?
Alethea was mumbling incomprehensibly, while Nail laid her head on his lap and tried to get her back to her senses.
Yeah, they're a new experiment, so we had no idea what the secondary effect was.
We? You said we. Who are you talking about?
Lael shook her more, with anxiety growing. He didn't like what he was hearing at all. Her face turned into pain and even contempt.
Yeah, me and my husband, the man Edath and Nail killed in order to rescue you, the man who was the father of my... Oh wait, also killed daughter?
The man who first bought me? That scary guy who bought me to be his teenage girl's pet? Was Sandra's husband? So, you joined our group to avenge them. Is that it?
Lael concluded. Sandra grinned. Her grin was angry, but also hurt.
That's right. You're the biggest one to blame. If you weren't all that precious to them, this wouldn't have happened. I spent months trying to figure out who were the perpetrators of their death. I was there, just a couple of meters long, waiting for them when I witnessed their deaths. We weren't the best people ever, but they didn't deserve it. When I finally found out who you were, I took my chance. I had these guys helping me out. They were my husband's followers, so they agreed to my will. Even if I told them, it would have to seem like a typical merchant thing, and nothing could happen to you since I was going to make you pay, not them. My main objective was to get Nail, Simon, and the rest, so Edath and you would despair, just like I did, and feel what I felt, even if it's not the same feeling. Unfortunately, I didn't get Nail, so my mission is incomplete.
Nail turned his head towards them. Lael looked at him in shock, realizing she didn't mention Simon was also a failed target. His eyes were wild like he never saw. His natural calm expression was lost. He forgot Alethea and tackled Sandra, beginning to punch her with all his might. Lael tried to stop him, but his sight was blinded by the hatred he was feeling at the moment. When Sandra's face was turned into nothing but a smashed skull, he stopped. He glanced at Lael, still with the same unsettling expression, and gestured quickly. Lael nodded and grabbed Alethea with Nail's help. Edath was sitting with her legs crossed in front of Simon, who was lying down on one of the mattresses. She was fondling his hair carefully, successfully calming him down. His breathing was slowing down, and he was looking at Edath with a lot of pain in his eyes. Words seemed pointless in those moments, she believed, but she wanted to say so many things to him. She couldn't find the courage, though, and she wasn't sure if he was actually listening to her.
Lael, Nail, and Althea are back.
Miguel spoke as he entered the room Simon and Edath were. She looked up to him and took a deep breath before speaking.
Are they okay?
Lael and Nail, yes, but Althea seems to be drugged as well.
Before she could ask any questions, Nail bumped into Miguel, who was blocking the entrance, and ran inside the room.
Nail.
Her eyes beginning to get wet again. Nail approached them slowly as despair began to fill the rage he had in his heart, along with sadness. He dropped his knees on the floor next to Simon and looked at him with a disbelief expression. Edath dropped her head on Nail's shoulder, squeezing his hands tight as she sobbed again. Nail hugged her with an arm and squeezed Simon's cold hand. He had so many things to say to him, but he hadn't the voice to tell him, and he wasn't sure if he'd understand sign language anymore. Miguel went out as Lael appeared in the room. Lael had given him Alethea, so he'd stay some time with her while he'd check up on his friends. He gasped when he looked at Simon. Lael took a deep breath, trying not to cry out in there, since the two of them were already sobbing.
Edath, Nail took care of the traitor. Edath.
Lael put his hand on Edath's hand. She looked at him and nodded.
Who was the traitor?
Sandra.
That bitch. I can't believe I didn't notice. I never overlooked something like this.
She violently cleaned some tears that dropped with the back of her hand.
And now that I remember, Simon did try to say her name, but I didn't understand. Fuck.
It's not your fault!
Lael reassured, holding her and Nail in his arms.
It isn't anyone's fault except for Sandra's.
No, it's mine. I'm the leader. I assume the consequences of mine and everyone's actions.
Edath squeezed his hands tight. She then felt a hand in her leg. Simon tried to speak, but no sound came out. Instead, he coughed more blood. They all grabbed his hand. His eyes weren't fixated anything particular anymore.
Shh, don't stress it. We don't argue anymore.
Edath tried to smile. Lael's heart was shattering with everything that's been happening. He admired the way they were reacting. They didn't deny or try to minimize what was happening. Instead, they all knew it and couldn't help but face it right in the eyes.
You should speak with him while he can still hear you,
Lael suggested. Nael and Edath looked at him.
Thousands of words could I say, but none will be enough. But I'm sure he knows all of them deep in his pervert heart.
Edath said, smiling, making Lael and Nael smile as well. Simon's hand twitched.
Don't worry. Even if you're a pervert, I still love you, know that. Thank you for existing.
Simon made a tiny smile. With that, his last breath silenced the room. Lael found himself crying, but wouldn't dare to make a sound. Nael's trembling fingers closed Simon's eyes.
Look at that bastard smiling at our suffering.
Edath tried to laugh, but instead she began to sob uncontrollably. Nael and Lael hugged her and cried as well. Their dearest inventor. The guy who constantly saved Nael from getting beaten up by his father. The man who gave shelter and principles to a young Edath. The person who was pranking and mocking Lael all the time. Their worst nightmare when it came to dirty jokes. Simon Orpist had died in the dirty hands of revenge.